Hi, and welcome back to Psychology 2, and we're going to do part 2 in social psychology. So here we're going to explore social perception, social influence, and in particular we're going to look at Milgram and Ausch's work in the area of obedience and conformity. And then the final bit we'll touch on is group behavior. So let's get started. So social perception was what we're going to start with. Factors that contribute to social perception include primary and recency effect, attribution theory, and body language. Let's start with primacy and recency effect, the importance of the first and the last impression. Primacy effect, first impressions, are really important. First impressions are examples of primacy effect. Recency effect. People tend to infer traits from behaviors. Fading memories allow more recent memories to take precedent. So primary is the first thing to come to mind. Recency is the most recent thing that comes to mind. When we attempt to figure out the cause of our or other people's behavior, we make attributions or guesses. Assumptions as to why we or others do what we do. So by looking at what is known as the attribution theory, an attribution is an assumption about why people do things. The attribution process is the process by which we make inferences about the motives and the traits of others through observation of their behavior. Now, we can already probably assume that's not 100% accurate. However, it's what we do. We make attributions in basically two ways: dispositional and situational attributions. And we have some guidelines about this. Let's look at what they are. With dispositional attributions, the inferred cause is internal. That just means that some of those personal traits, motives, or attitudes come from within the person. For example, if you fail a test, you might say, well, you failed because you have a poor memory or you don't lack the skill to do a good test. It's because you are at fault. When we use situational attribution, here's what we're doing is we're attributing the cause of behaviors to some factor in the environment, not me, something outside of me. So for example, we'll use that failed test. You might say, well, the test was unfair or the professor didn't teach the material very well. That's situational. It's outside of you. Dispositional is that it's you. It's either a strength or a fault in you. We can touch on another element here, and it's called actor-observer effect. And this is something that most of us participate in, even if we wouldn't think we do. Actor-observer bias, we tend to overemphasize dispositional, personal choices and stuff, when making attributions about the behavior of other people, and to overemphasize situational factors, the environment, in explaining our own behavior. So if I do something wrong or bad or not looked upon by others very well, I would say, well, that's because it was situational. But if I see you do that same thing, I would say that's because it's something in you. You can probably guess we are not perfect at determining attributions. We can and do make errors. The fundamental attribution error, attribution of behavior is to internal or external causes. We can consider a brand perspective to see the way the error can work. Societies have generally divided into two types: cultures where people make their own choices and pursue individual goals, and then there's the cultures that consider their collective or of all citizens when they make their choices. They are divided into individualistic and collective cultures. Individualistic cultures tend to focus on behavior rather than on the situation. I am successful. I can achieve this. Whereas collective cultures stress interdependence. What's in the best interest of us? So if we look further, we can look at what's known as the self-serving bias. It's another way in which we make attribution errors. Self-serving bias is where people are likely to ascribe success as things that I'd have inside me, and dispositional factors, but my failures are external, that is to say, the situational. So anything I'm good at, it's because it's in me. Anything I'm not so good at, it's out there. Lastly, we can look at gender bias. Men are more likely to interpret a woman's smile or friendliness toward a man as flirting. Male gender bias. A male gender bias, one can smile as a way of just acknowledging or recognizing or just being polite rather than anything that's known as flirting. Now I want to jump into social influence because there's a lot of things here that affect us on a day-to-day basis. Social influence focuses on the ways in which people alter thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of others. So it's us influencing other people. In this concept, we're going to be addressing two very important concepts. One of obedience, the other of conformity. Now I'm going to post a couple of videos of these experiments in week 7 as well, so you can see those should you choose. Obedience to authority is one big study area, and it was done by Milgram. This experiment cannot be replicated as it was because of ethical reasons. It is a study done at Yale to explore learning and memory, but it wasn't really about that. Subjects in the study were designated as teachers and supposedly delivered shocks to learners. They really weren't connected, but neither did the teacher see the student. So the study was designed to determine if the teachers would comply with the request of the scientist, the researcher. The teachers thought they were delivering shocks, but were told to continue with the experiment even though the person was screaming on the other end. The results indicated that of the 40 men in the project, 65% complied with the scientists throughout the study. Subsequent research showed that women also administered the shock. So what really happened? There really were no shocks delivered. The learners were Confederates. They were a part of the experiment. Milgram did debrief the teachers as to what really the intent of the experiment was. Now I would recommend, so why did the people of Milgram study obey the experimenter? Check out page 296 to 297 for more of the explanation. So some of the reasons that people could have obeyed. Well, maybe it's socialization. People are taught from very young to obey authority. These scientists would have a lab coat, glasses, pen pocket protector, and all the things that made them look like scientist clipboard, and would just say, yes, keep going. Did you obey or not? 65% would. So maybe socialization was part of it. Maybe a lack of social comparison. There was no information to use to compare how others had done. If I had known that others had not gone, maybe I wouldn't have. Thirdly, perception of legitimate authority. The scientists wore white jackets, had a clipboard and things for notes, but they only look the authoritative part, they weren't. And then there's another technique that you could explain why this happens. It's called the foot and door technique. And basically what it starts with, if you ask people to do, in this case, you ask the teachers to put this shock on a person every time they get a wrong answer. If they're little and small, you go, that's great. As it gets bigger, what ends up happening with the foot and door is that the small commitment, little bits of shock, you get compliance. And then as you ask for bigger commitment, that compliance is already sort of built in. That's the foot and door. There could also be an inaccessibility of values. Maybe these participants were of varying values of what's acceptable and unacceptable. Another explanation is what's called buffers in the experiment. Now, that's the obedience one. Now, that was Milgram. I will put that up in week 7. It can still be done as an experiment today. There needed to be changes in it in terms of its ethics. But now I would like us to move towards conformity. Conformity is the changing or adopting a behavior or an attitude to be consistent with the norms of a group or the expectations of others. Some conformity is necessary if we are to have a society at all. For example, I'm really happy with everybody adhering to the social norm of driving on the right-hand side of the road when you're out in your car. If people just chose to drive any old way they like, it would be pretty dangerous. So it's good. Sometimes conformity works for the social betterment. We first need to understand what is a social norm, though. Social norms are widely accepted expectations concerning social behavior. We are said to conform when we change our behavior in order to adhere to social norms. Whether we like it or not, we all conform to social norms. So the Ausch study, his study design was this. A group of people are shown a line, just a single line, and then they are asked to pick which of the length of lines that were presented with one of the three lines, which one is the shorter or which one matches. If you look at figure 12.5 on page 297, you'll see an example of it. I will post a video of how that experiment goes in place. Now there's one subject in this whole experiment. The rest of the participants are Confederates. They are part of the experiment, and they intentionally choose the wrong line. Results are this. Does the subject conform to the group, though they are obviously wrong? Well, 75% agree with the majority's wrong answer at least once. For the complete results, we will look at 5% of the participants went along with the incorrect answer all along, 70% went along some of the time, and 25% remained completely independent. Conformity was evident in groups as small as 3 Confederates. However, if there was just one Confederate disagreed with the majority, then participants' conformity decreased dramatically. So what are some of the factors that can influence conformity? Well, belonging to a collectivist rather than individual society can have a big influence because their culture is built in to look after the larger group. 2, the desire to be liked by other members of the group. That's strong in a lot of people. 3, if we have low self-esteem, we might be prone to not stand up for ourselves. Social shyness could certainly impact conformity. And the lack of familiarity with the task. If we don't understand the rules, sometimes we just don't participate. Now, one of the other areas that have been taking some research study from social psychologists is social media and the internet. So social psychologists have been studying the effects of social media and the internet on how we interact with others. Some key points. Women who are more confident in their relationships are more likely to post Facebook profile pictures with their partner in them. Another point that comes out of the research, users of Facebook tend to overestimate their friends' happiness compared to their own. Research also suggests that we enter a state of flow or positive emotional state when using Facebook. On the not so positive side, cyberbullying is related to our ability to feel empathy. Cyberbullies may experience less empathy for others. Now, the last area we're going to look at is group behavior. Now, this is what's going to relate to James to some bit, the guy in our introduction. Groups can support us in many ways, including help us to perform better. Groups can also support us in things that we never thought we would, like James mentioned in the intro to part 1. So let's look at some of the variables around this. Now, social facilitation is one of the first areas of study in social psychology. Social facilitation is the effect on performance that results from the presence of other people. The presence of others increases our levels of arousal. We're more aware when people are around us, and sometimes that's motivating. At high levels of arousal, our performance of simple tasks is facilitated. Our performance on more complex might be impaired if people are around us, because this was observed, I'll get back to that. This whole idea of social facilitation was first observed and recorded in 1897 in a bicycle racing. Norman Triplett was one of the first social psychologists who noticed that those who raced with others opposed to those who raced alone and against the clock performed better in races. Basically, the racing with others stimulated the competition motivation and enhanced performance. Now, sometimes if we need to perform before a group, we can be affected not only by their presence of others, but also by the concern that they are actually evaluating us. Thus, the influence on us could be negative if we feel like we're being judged. Another way that a group can negatively affect our behavior is through social loafing. That is the impaired performance because the group, especially with humdrum jobs that group members believe they're not going to be held accountable. So diffusion responsibility may be at play. This is where each person may feel less obligated to help because, well, others are present, they'll do it. Group size matters. So if group size matters, does group decision making influence by the size of the group? Well, social decision schemes are rules that govern much of groups' decision making. For example, these can include some examples can include this majority wins scheme. The decision is reached is the initial decision supported by the majority. It's kind of like our elections. The truth wins scheme. As additional information is gained, the group comes to know that one choice is obviously better than another. Or there's the 2/3 majority scheme. If there are 2/3 who believe, then they can typically sway the remaining 1/3. And then another is what's known as the first shift rule. The group tends to support the decision that reflects the first shift in opinion expressed by any group member. Now, polarization and the risky shift. Can group decisions be riskier or more conservative than designs that we make ourselves? Well, polarization in the group affects of taking an extreme position. Groups tend to take greater risks than their members would take as an individual. Now, this can be a result of diffusion of responsibility. The more group members there are, the less responsibility any individual feels lands on them. That's one part that might explain James. Being part of a larger group of celebratory people, he might have felt less responsible for any of the decisions that he made. Now, there's another related content with the concept known as group think. Group members tend to be more influenced by group cohesiveness. The more we are together and tight, the better that is, and the dynamic leader than by realities of the situation. When a threat heightens the cohesiveness of the group and is the source of stress, under stress, the group members tend to not consider all their options carefully. They go for a solution that can work. So why does group think decision why is it often flawed? Well, there's feelings of invulnerability that if I'm in a group of 20 people making decisions, the size of the group might make me feel invulnerable. We can't make any mistakes. Or if we do, it's not going to land just on me. Or it could be that the group's belief in its rightness is going to stand on its own. Or discrediting of information contrary to the group's decision, or pressures on the group members to conform. And lastly, stereotyping of members of the outgroup. Now, the last area we want to touch base on is mob behavior and de-individualization. Now, that's the component that's really important in regards to James here. De-individuation, or mob behavior, as in the introduction I made in the video with the Montreal Canadiens Stanley Cup win in 2008. What happened to James is de-individuation. It's the state of reduced self-awareness and lowered concern for social evaluation. Many factors can lead to de-individuation. This includes the feelings of anonymity. I'm not focused on individually. A diffusion of responsibility. I'm not going to be held responsible. I'm one of many. The arousal due to the noise and crowding gets us all caught up in a moment. Focusing on the emerging group norms rather than one's own values. I'm more aware of all the other activity going on around me than I am about what I believe is right or wrong. And then lastly, under these conditions, crowd members behave more aggressively than they would as individuals. So we can look at, in this component, as sort of as a partner to it, is social roles. The groups to which we belong define certain roles. Roles are behaviors considered to be appropriate for individuals occupying certain positions within a group. These roles tell us how people are likely to act towards us. Roles shape our behavior. Our roles change based on different social contexts. We tend to take on social roles and act differently when interacting with different groups. Again, I'll go back to Philip Zimbardo. He did a famous prison study that had regular college students like you, mostly men, who were brought into the college or the university where he was working and divided into two groups. There were prisoners or guards, and they were in a mock prison situation held at the university. The study was supposed to go for 2 weeks, but it was canceled after 6 days because the guards became so abusive and the prisoners became very depressed. So the roles that we play can have a powerful impact on us. Now, on a different tact in social psychology, there is another altruism we'll talk about. Altruism and the bystander effect. Altruism is selfless concern for the welfare of others. We are more likely to perform acts of altruism for people who are generally or genetically related to us, or in situations where we expect reciprocity. Reciprocity is the give and take. If I do something for you, you do something for me. The helper who helps. Well, there's many factors that contribute to helping behavior. Observers are more likely to help when they are in a good mood. That kind of makes sense. People who are empathetic are more likely to be helpful to people in need. Again, that makes sense. Bystanders may not help unless they believe that an emergency exists. Observers must assume responsibility to act. There's some examples that have been presented by social psychologists that look at groups of people who are witness to an unfortunate activity, aggressive act. Nobody will act if the group size is too big. It's remarkable how group can influence personal decisions. Ordinary people in extraordinary times. For example, the firefighters, the police officers, the ordinary people who came to aid of those victims on September 11th, 2001. Altruistic. They didn't think how this was going to affect them. Many of them held positions that meant this is what you do. Social psychology is a powerful discipline, and I know this was a quick overview, but I hope you gained something from it. If you ever get a chance to take a course in social psychology, give it a shot. You'll learn a lot. Okay, everybody. Bye now.